The universe, vast and indifferent, stretched endlessly before Captain Jonathan Riker. As an explorer, he had come to accept that space was as much a frontier of the mind as it was a vast expanse of stars, planets, and strange, unknowable phenomena. He had ventured into the depths of distant galaxies, charting unexplored planets, navigating through nebulae, and engaging with alien species. But there was one thing he had not anticipated on his most recent mission: an encounter with something completely beyond his understanding. Something that defied the rigid logic of human science. It began on the planet Elysium 4, a world marked by lush forests and sprawling plains, its ecosystem rich and teeming with life. The crew of the Explorer had been sent to conduct a survey, tasked with determining if the planet had the potential to be colonized or if it would simply remain another distant world in the galaxy. The team's initial reports had been promising the planet appeared to be devoid of intelligent life, and its biota was non-threatening. But Jonathan, as always, was cautious. He had learned long ago that first impressions could be deceiving. It was while collecting samples in a dense forest that he encountered the first signs of something unusual. The forest floor was covered in strange, luminescent fungi that flickered in the dark like distant stars, and as Jonathan moved through the brush, he noticed something that stood out among the natural landscape. A peculiar shimmer in the air, a distortion of light and matter, like a mirage on a hot day. His scientific mind immediately began to assess, but he couldn't place what it was. Jonathan's training as a scientist, combined with his deep curiosity, drove him forward. He had learned the importance of discovery in his years of space exploration, and despite the inexplicable oddity, he approached the shimmering distortion. As he reached out a hand toward it, the air seemed to hum with an unnatural energy. The shimmer, almost alive, rippled in response to his presence. Then, it happened. The shimmer seemed to condense into a swirling, almost liquid form. A surge of energy shot through Jonathan, and for a brief moment, he felt as if he were drowning in a tide of foreign thoughts, emotions, sensations, memories, none of them his own. His body froze as a flood of alien consciousness overwhelmed him, not with hostility, but with a sense of deep curiosity and awareness. He collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath as the sensation finally ebbed, leaving him with the disorienting sense of being profoundly changed. The encounter had not been a hallucination. When Jonathan opened his eyes, he found that the shimmering distortion had taken form, an alien presence that was not entirely separate from him, but intertwined in a way that felt familiar. It was not a creature in the traditional sense, but something different, a symbiotic life form, composed of organic matter that seemed to blend with the very air around it. It lacked a distinct shape, but its presence was undeniable. The creature's consciousness, a strange mix of intelligence and emotion, flooded his mind again, not in a threatening manner, but with an odd feeling of belonging. It was as if the creature had been waiting for him, calling out to him across the stars, seeking a connection that neither of them fully understood. Jonathan had no way of knowing what to do. He was an explorer, trained to engage with new life forms, but this was unlike anything he had ever encountered. His first instinct was to panic, but something in his mind told him that to do so would be a grave mistake. Instead, he calmed his breath and tried to communicate with the entity, speaking out loud, though he doubted it could understand his words. "What are you?" he asked, his voice shaking despite his best efforts to remain composed. The answer, when it came, was not through words, but through a feeling, an impression of something vast, ancient, and patient. The alien consciousness reached out to his own, not in an invasive way, but with an offering of understanding, as if it too was seeking answers. The creature, for lack of a better word, had been alone for an unimaginable period. It was a sentient life form that had no body of its own, but instead existed in a symbiotic relationship with the ecosystem of the planet Elysium 4. It was capable of influencing the flora and fauna around it, acting as a bridge between the physical world and the unknown energies that existed beneath the surface. But it had never encountered a human before, never had the opportunity to communicate with a species like Jonathan's. And so began an unprecedented interaction between two very different forms of life: Jonathan, a human explorer with an unquenchable thirst for discovery, and the alien life form that had no form but existed through a complex network of consciousness bound to the planet it inhabited. The first days of their connection were disorienting. Jonathan found that the creature's presence was always with him, hovering in his mind, a subtle hum of thoughts and sensations. It was not like anything he had ever experienced before. The symbiotic alien's consciousness was not intrusive, but it was inescapable. Every thought Jonathan had was somehow shared, each moment of clarity, each fleeting doubt was known to the entity. And in return, the entity's vast experience, its deep understanding of the planet, and the energies that flowed through it were also shared with him. Jonathan struggled to understand. How could such an alien life form exist without a physical body? How could it experience emotions or thoughts without a brain, without a central nervous system? And yet, despite the alienness of the creature's existence, Jonathan could feel its emotions, its loneliness, its curiosity, its yearning. It was a deep, profound connection, not one of dominance or subjugation, but of shared existence. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between Jonathan and the alien grew. He learned that the creature had lived on the planet for millennia, watching over its ecosystem, ensuring its balance. It had once been part of a larger collective, a species that had spread across the stars, but its people had vanished long ago. Now, the alien was alone, wandering the endless stretches of time, waiting for something or someone to provide it with meaning. In turn, Jonathan shared his own story, his life on Earth, his childhood, his training as an explorer. He told the creature of humanity's quest for knowledge, of the endless pursuit of discovery, of how humans had reached out into the stars, hoping to find life, hoping to understand the unknown. The creature listened, its presence a quiet but constant hum in his mind. Jonathan couldn't be sure, but he felt as if it understood him in ways he couldn't explain, as if it saw something in him that he hadn't yet seen in himself. Over time, Jonathan came to realize that their connection was not just one of survival or convenience. There was something more, a mutual emotional bond that formed between them. The creature, which he had once viewed as an alien anomaly, began to feel less like a strange, unknowable entity and more like a companion, a partner. The alien's thoughts, though foreign, no longer seemed so alien to him. He began to understand its desires, its fears, and its needs in a way that transcended language or physical form. Likewise, Jonathan's emotions were no longer his alone. The creature had become attuned to his feelings, his hopes, and his uncertainties. In the quiet moments when they shared their thoughts, there was no distance between them. The bond they had formed was as symbiotic as it was emotional. It was a connection born of understanding and compassion, of a shared journey toward discovery. It was a partnership that neither had anticipated, but that neither would ever again live without. As the days passed, Jonathan began to feel as if he were no longer fully human. The lines between himself and the alien life form began to blur, and the distinction between their thoughts and emotions grew less and less defined. It was no longer a relationship between a human and an alien, but between two sentient beings who had found something precious in one another, a deep, abiding connection that transcended the physical and the intellectual. At times, Jonathan would catch himself wondering whether this connection was truly healthy. Was it possible to rely so completely on another being, to let another's consciousness intertwine with his own to such an extent? Could he continue as an individual while sharing his thoughts so deeply with something that had no form? But as the days turned into months, Jonathan began to realize that these questions were less important than the bond they had forged. For the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to be truly seen not as a human or as a singular individual, but as part of something greater, something shared. The creature, now more of a companion than a mere alien, was not just a guide or a curiosity. It had become a part of him, and he of it. There were still moments of uncertainty, of discomfort as they explored this strange relationship. But the more they shared, the more they learned to coexist. They had both found a form of peace, an understanding that transcended their differences, a connection that was as deep and intricate as the vast cosmos itself. In the end, Jonathan understood that the true nature of exploration was not just about finding new worlds or understanding new life forms. It was about discovering the connections that bind all beings, the shared emotions and experiences that made them more alike than different. And in that realization, Jonathan found a profound truth: the deepest discoveries were not those of the mind, but those of the heart.